So I'm on my Flipboard here on my Samsung phone, and the headline says, "Here's how the second biggest bank collapse in the US history happened." And they're basically saying it was a bank run. What say you, Tom?
Hmm. Well, I guess it comes down to what do you define as a bank run? So, in classic parlance, what people consider a bank run is, we've all seen it in movies and stuff where a bunch of depositors show up at the bank wanting their cash, and the bank doesn't have enough cash. Okay, so what constitutes a bank run nowadays when, granted, I mean, a lot of depositors could have showed up wanting cash, but most people don't deal in cash now. They deal in digital or some sort of negotiable instrument, a check or a bank draft, or people aren't going to show up and say, "Hey, I want $100,000 in cash," and expect the bank to actually have that. So, what I'm alluding to is what constitutes a bank run, and what do we mean when we say that in regards to this instance? Because I think that's important. I think you're going to find out that that's just a generic term that they throw out there that it doesn't necessarily mean anything. I think what they're pointing at is the cause for the collapse is a symptom. That's what I'm beating around the bush getting to. It's a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it begs the question, what's the actual cause, right?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like I was saying to you earlier, what causes the run? Obviously, something is causing the run.
Right. People just don't randomly show up and decide, "Hey, I think, hundreds of us are just going to go down and take our money out of the bank today." There's usually a reason. Like there has to be some sort of a reason for people to do that. And that reason is the actual cause. The bank run, what they call the cause, people taking money out, well, that's a symptom of the cause. And we never talk about the cause. We love to point at symptoms, but we never want to talk about the cause. The question is why.
Yeah. And there's how many billion dollars in assets?
Well, don't quote me to an absolute number, but my understanding was they had approximately 190 or 200 billion dollars in assets in the bank.
Okay. And a lot of these were this CVB, Silicon Valley Bank, basically financed a lot of startup companies. So again, these small startup companies are in big trouble.
Yeah, and it's possible that part of the problem lies right there. Like the risk profile of a bank that specializes in startup companies is going to be different than a traditional bank like our banks like CIBC, who have a very, very stringent set of criteria for being able to borrow money from them, where and they're not going to be looking at like high risk type of companies that are like startups and things like that. It just doesn't happen in those type of chartered banks. So a bank like SVB that has that kind of risk profile is in an environment like this where we have rising interest rates and everything is, the cost of all that borrowing is getting higher. There could be a number of reasons, like the individual bank depositors, the smaller companies in there could be in trouble, not making payments, different things like that. Those are actual causes for a bank run. The bank run is actually the lack of confidence. The people suddenly have a lack of confidence in the bank and start pulling money out. But what's causing the lack of confidence? Have they got a sign out front saying, "Hey, this bank's about to collapse, get your money out now"? I doubt that. So what is the actual cause? I don't think we're going to know until, we may never know because we may never be told the actual truth. But I suspect we'll know more as the coming weeks come by. We're going to find out that there's more to this than meets the eye right now.
Yeah, like perhaps it's a contagion of some sort. Let's talk about that word contagion and how this might tie in with FTX failing.
Right. So I did a video about a month ago, derivatives for dummies, and I talked about, if you go to the end of that video, maybe I'll link it down in the description down here. Check that out if I remember. What I talked about was the wet spaghetti bowl analogy. So imagine a company as a strand of wet spaghetti, and you throw it in a bowl, and then you take every other company and throw it in there as well. So you got a bowl of wet spaghetti. Now imagine a single strand, how many connections it's making to other strands, and imagine each one of those connections is some sort of trade or financial obligation with another institution. the math just gets so screwed up when there's all these people owing and this is bonded and that's held for a certain period of time. You know what I mean? Like financial instruments are complex and they're all a little different in the interactions between them. So you can just imagine how messed up the math gets when someone doesn't make a payment or there's an ongoing problem with an institution. I mean, if I don't get paid, then it's like I say to the hardware store guy, hey, I can't pay that bill I had on Friday for the paint I bought because the boss didn't pay me. Well, how come the boss didn't pay you? Well, he asked the boss. He says, well, my boss didn't pay me either, and well, we didn't get our receivables either. So this knock-on effect of people not paying eventually ends in this is the result. So I suspect what we're going to find out is that there's a lot of people just not paying their bills, and so this creates some sort of lack of confidence that's behind the scenes. People on the inside of that bank probably knew what was going on, and they begin to talk, whispers to their friends and to other people, and so quietly, there'll be an exodus of funds from the bank. And I think what we'll see when we examine this a little more forensically, or obviously not us, but when people that examine it more forensically, you're going to find out that a whole bunch of people pulled their money out in the last couple months suspiciously.
They did. I saw a video of some people that actually worked at the bank, in that bank, did pull money. Yeah.
There you go.
So here the Canadian banks themselves are actually calling this a contagion because the headline, another headline on the Flipboard said Canada banks erased 19.7 billion in value on the SVB contagion. So they're calling it a contagion. They're saying, yeah, this is a spaghetti bowl for sure, right?
I still remember reading the headlines when Enron went down, and the CIBC Bank in Canada, I think the number was 1.98 billion they ended up having to write off because that's how in deep they were with Enron. And it's worse now today. Financial institutions, in their attempts to continue to make more leverage and to be able to make more loans and go farther out on the risk curve to get more yield for various different obligations and promises, have just taken us to another level of insanity in terms of these numbers. And we're starting to see some of that unwind now. I think what you're going to find, and I'm already hearing people alluding to it, is this, back to the contagion word, is this we'll probably find started with FTX. And it may have in fact started with something prior to FTX. FTX may, when this is all said and done, turn out to be another in a series. There was another series of smaller events that we're not privy to that news. Because here's the thing about derivatives, they're private. And it's going to be derivatives or some variation on those that are responsible for this because they're private, they're done behind the scenes, there's no accounting. So it's very difficult for people looking at the industry to see where these institutions are with these derivatives. And of course, this bleeds into their mainstream balance sheet that we can look at. It's like not like you can separate the two, I mean, legally they're separated, but in reality, that institution has to answer for all of their transactions, right?
Sure. Yeah.
If they blow up on this side, it's,
yeah.
Is this side going to be spared? I don't know. I guess it depends on how they're structured. But
and because these were a lot of startup companies that were financed by this bank, now they've only got the ones that were insured are only insured for 250,000. So some of these startup companies apparently pour a lot of their payroll in there, keep their payroll in there so they could have $1 million, $10 million for payroll. So back to that spaghetti bowl, the domino effect is going to hit the modern guy, the average guy who's just not going to get a paycheck now. We're going to see a lot of people suffer, I think.
Yeah, and when we say startup company, it's easy to envision, a small company. But a small company in terms of what companies can be might be, 500 employees. So you got 500 employees wondering if they're going to get a paycheck in the next week, not to mention the other problems with these companies paying their bills and their to, different vendors that they owe money to. So everybody gets hit, I mean, it isn't just one institution. You can't just pluck that institution out and say, okay, no problem, we'll just put that over here. There's all these obligations that extend out from that institution, and then they hit, depending on the size of an obligation with another institution. If you're talking, like another small bank, a private bank may have a very large amount of their capital with this company, and now they're tied up and they can't meet their obligations, and they can end up tanking in
Yeah.
a matter of 5 or 6 days, just because of what's happening temporarily in another situation. Something that might have otherwise been resolved, an institution could lose everything just while these guys are sorting out their mess.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the fallout of this. I know that the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says that the government's trying to help the SVB depositors, but dismisses bailout. She says we are not going to do that again. And that's on the headline now on the Flipboard. Janet Yellen saying we are not doing a bailout on this bank. So what say you about that?
Well, yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. If it was JP Morgan, that'd be a different story.
Yeah.
I mean, it comes down to, I suspect what'll happen with this bank is they'll arrange to have the assets sold off to the other big banks. Same thing that happened with Lehman. I think Lehman and Bear Stearns got carved up and sold to JP Morgan and a couple other institutions for pennies on the dollar. I think they'll do everything at this point to try to patch this up and make it a non-issue. The question is, will they be able to do it? As I said on the way here, in I'll do a more simplified version of what I said when we were talking about this on the way here, is that they'll be able to patch it up possibly and make it look okay. But you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together. I mean, you can't pretend that if we go back to where we were in the financial system 2 or 3 years ago, even if we reset the clock and put interest rates back where they were and say, oops, we messed up, we rose too high too fast. It isn't going to matter because a lot of the damage has been done now. The people that are unemployed aren't going to be given their jobs back. The people that couldn't pay their bills, the financial institutions and stores that closed are still going to be closed. They're not going to be able to come back to the trough and qualify. So the damage that's been done has been done. All they're going to be able to do is put a couple of band-aids on a few people. And then, of course, if they get on their bullhorn and tell everybody everything's okay, maybe they'll start borrowing again. But I think the response to this is going to be, the talk will be, I think we need to lower interest rates again. We'll see.
Right.
We'll see. We've done too much damage now. This will be their excuse to pivot and lower from 7% down to 4% or something, so they can try to stimulate lending again, borrowing. That's what I suspect. We'll see if I'm right.
Okay.